The same day that Oracle's stock dropped nearly 11%, OpenAI released their newest GPT-5.2 model shortly after OpenAI went code red, trying to stay ahead of the pack. But the real question is GPT 5.2 really that much better than other AI models? And while this competition is brewing among the frontier labs, we also have competition among hyperscalers that are trying to build out huge data centers. And for consumers like us that are creating the demand for AI models, we are enjoying this competition because we are the direct benefactor of constant improvements in AI models. But the reality is that OpenAI has been losing ground in their market share for a long time. For example, this chart shows the market share in API usage for OpenAI declining since 2022 to other frontier labs. And their most recent release of GPT 5.2 likely isn't going to tilt this market share back in their favor. I mean, they made some impressive improvements when it comes to benchmarks, especially when it comes to long context improvements compared to the 5.1 model and math benchmarks like Amy, but the consumers were not that impressed, leaving us in a perpetual hype cycle between every release. So today, we're going to zoom out and look at the capital structure and try to look at the broad market impact that OpenAI has, and we'll also look at why OpenAI is not only in a precarious situation, but also GPT 5.2 release is just another hint that OpenAI doesn't really have the competitive edge anymore. Welcome to Caleb Writes Code, where every second counts. Let's start by giving credit where credit is due. OpenAI had two groundbreaking moments when it came to AI innovation. The first one was in 2018 when they introduced GPT for the first time, and the second one was in 2024 when they released a reasoning model called O1. And innovations like this allowed OpenAI to create huge user adoption, where now around 10% of the world population is using ChatGPT on a weekly basis. But ever since 2022, the market share has been split to other competitors like Google, xAI, Meta, and Anthropic in their API use cases. And this also reflects in chat application market share as well. But the concern isn't that the market share is split, which is not a bad thing. Actually, that's what we as consumers want to happen because competition is good. It forces innovation from frontier labs like Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI. But here's the problem: time. Hyperscalers like Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft are all heavily investing into building data centers, but the majority of their funding comes from their own cash flow. But not all hyperscalers are structured this way. If you look at this chart, it shows the percentage of money being spent on AI data centers against their cash flow. And you can see that Oracle is spending more than the money that they generate. And this extra money, since they're not coming from cash flow, they come from a mix of other channels than cash. So even if we happen to over-provision our data centers because we hit limit on our AI innovation, hyperscalers that are exposed to debt with huge time obligation will be in trouble. The total projected investment in data centers from these hyperscalers are estimated to be $2.9 trillion by 2028, according to Morgan Stanley's projection. And while $1.4 trillion is funded from hyperscalers' own cash flow and capital expenditure, we still have a huge $1.5 trillion hole in funding that is largely funded by other channels like private equity, venture capitals, asset-backed loans, and loans tied to cash flow upon completion, as well as private equity. But that's not to say using other channels of funding than cash flow is bad. In fact, venture capitals and private equity can be a great resource to create value in our society. But when we compare cash flow-based funding to debt-based funding, it starts to add pressure to the frontier labs to innovate faster to create more demand from consumers. And now we introduce the time aspect of it, since we now have obligation mixed into the equation. And the scale of this obligation is huge. OpenAI is making a $300 billion promise to Oracle, which goes like this. Once Oracle builds their data centers, OpenAI will surely use them as promised. Here's another way to look at the situation. You can think of Oracle as building an apartment building, and OpenAI is promising Oracle a large list of tenants to the tune of $300 billion. So as long as Oracle can build this apartment building using their own money, OpenAI will fill the apartment with tenants. But here's the chicken or the egg problem. Oracle needs to muster up the cost and take the risk in spending that much in the first place to build the apartment since OpenAI is promising them $300 billion worth of tenants. But this requires OpenAI to continue being the number one and the underlying LLMs to improve, which tends to increase demand from consumers. But meanwhile, other competitors are closing in on OpenAI really fast. And OpenAI's code red moment that led to the release of GPT 5.2 is impressive in benchmarks, but not by that much. At least not long enough for the rest of the market to easily catch up in a matter of a month or two. So again, while competition like this is good, Oracle's exposure to OpenAI's promise to deliver being the number one and curating high demand from consumers is starting to look more risky, especially when considering Google's growing dominance not only in AI models, but also in their TPU as the alternative method of training AI models, while OpenAI is spending hundreds of billions of dollars buying chips from NVIDIA and AMD. So the AI race is starting to look less like a race towards AGI, but it's starting to look more like who can outlive OpenAI, because simply keeping a 1 to 2 month pace to OpenAI is enough to put OpenAI in trouble. Because OpenAI is running a sprint while the rest can passively run a marathon and be okay. And this precarious situation is where a lot of people are labeling the industry as an AI bubble. Not necessarily because we are spending a lot of money, but because of alternative channels of funding data centers that are grounded by the promise of filling the data centers with tenants as long as these data centers are built for them. In other words, OpenAI has to win the AI race, because OpenAI losing the AI race has huge economical implication from the data centers. And OpenAI being number 2 or number 3 is just not going to cut it. Not because fair market competition is a bad thing, but because of promises like $300 billion worth of demand that OpenAI is promising to Oracle to greenlight their data center build out that Oracle can't simply meet by using their own cash flow. In contrast, companies like Google, Meta, and Anthropic can sustain being number 2 or number 3 for a long stretch because the risk of over-provisioning data centers is just not the same as where OpenAI and Oracle are driving themselves into. So as we approach 2028, where we expect all of these data centers to be finished, what we want to see is OpenAI showing clear dominance in innovation, just like we have seen from their previous GPT innovation in 2018, and reasoning model innovation of O1 model in 2024, but not small improvements like GPT 5.2 that can easily be overtaken by other frontier labs. In other words, the next 2 years is going to be critical for OpenAI's pace of innovation because they have the next 2 years to prove their clear dominance over other frontier labs in LLMs, image generation, video models, as well as enterprise use cases, consumer electronics, gaming, and other ways that OpenAI will grow.